And it shows people that they're not, they're not just pieces in some faceless bureaucracy, some political, pseudo-political, religious political machine that runs over people. Which, over the years, I've gotten a lot from people I used to go to school with back here who wondered, number one, why was I at the Vatican? What was I doing covering the Pope? That didn't sound like me. And how can you live? How can you still be a Catholic after seeing the Vatican close up for so many years? Well, mainly what I saw were human beings trying to do a good job. It's a far more human place than people give it credit for. Other questions? Yes?
I have one, not so much prophecy, but, the big shots there. They sit in the Vatican and they're literally on a continent, Europe, especially Western Europe, where the faith is being distinguished. And they don't ever seem to be alarmed by that. And now they're kind of into they're all becoming climate scientists. I just sit there and I think, I really must. I vacation in Italy a lot. I love it. But there's nobody in the churches except for maybe the bigger days. I never get the feeling that they're worried about the place they are.
Well, they are worried, but they don't like to talk about it much because it's not a pretty story what's happening in much of Europe. I lived in Italy 30 years. Our family went to a local Italian parish, and our kids grew up there. And what happens is families take advantage of the local parishes up to a certain age. For one thing, that was where the soccer field was, and other activities, and it's a great place for socializing and everything else. And then kids get to be after confirmation age, and they drift away and come back for funerals and marriages. I think they are concerned, very concerned, but, they don't have an answer, okay? What Pope Francis believes is the answer is for the Church to show a different side of itself, which is the more merciful side, the side less based on Catholic identity and the rules and the catechism in a way that might become more attractive to young people. In other words, by our works you will know us, and here's what we're going to do now. We're going to dedicate most of our resources to helping people in the world. But not everybody buys that, and frankly, I don't know how you reach younger generations and keep them. I don't have an answer either. So far, no one I know at the Vatican has come up with an answer. They actually have a new department called the Council, I believe it's the Council for New Evangelization, and they haven't exactly made great strides in reducing the fall-off in Europe. But you're right, Europe is the only continent that is actually losing Catholics in actual numbers. There's not only no growth, there's negative growth. So, I guess a lot of people at the Vatican have a kind of faith in the pendulum swinging back. They take the long view of history. They know there are times when the Church grows in some areas and loses energy in others. And so, maybe that gives them some comfort. Yes? The woman in the green star. Is that a green star?
Years ago, there was a novel that came out called The Shoes of the Fisherman by Morris West. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
Well, in there, there was this sort of unknown cardinal who was voted in as Pope, who was the most unconventional Pope ever seen. He rode around in a little bitty car like Francis does, and he went out among the people like Francis does, and eventually was assassinated because the Vatican itself was so ingrained in tradition that they couldn't handle him.
Right.
And I haven't read the book in years, but I remember certain things about it. and things about Francis remind me of that mythical Pope, because of the way he seems to be more a Pope of the people than have some. I mean, I grew up in the days of Pius, where, you know, he was stern and forbidding and you know, totally unapproachable. And so this is, but I'm seeing similarities between that book and Francis. Do you see that?
Definitely. I mean, he's right off the pages of Shoes of the Fisherman in many ways. And even for those of you who haven't read the book or seen the movie, I think you know what she's talking about. The Pope who basically wants to be, as he says, normal. On the other hand, I think Pope Francis is also discovering that it's impossible to be normal as a Pope. Number one is security concerns. And, you know, yeah, I don't think what happened to the Pope in Shoes of the Fisherman will happen to Pope Francis. Because he is still kind of kept in a bubble, even though you see him riding around, you know, and talking with the people. They take security very seriously. And I don't think anybody inside the Vatican would ever, you know, I don't see those kind of forces working inside the Vatican. I know some people think John Paul I was murdered. I don't. I looked into this very carefully. Pope John Paul I was sick. He only lasted a month, but he was sick and never should have been elected. He had a massive heart attack. He had terrible circulation problems. He was, you know, the scandal was that they elected a very sick man to be Pope. I think Francis does want to be the Pope of the people. I think he wants to make it not so much about him, about the papacy. But the paradox is that he's so popular by doing that, is that it is about him. You know, it really is about him. And you just can't get away from that. You know, that is the kind of catch-22. You know, now maybe if he's around a long time, that newness will go away, and then the Francis effect, if it filters throughout the Catholic Church, I think would have very, very deep repercussions, and it would be a good thing for the Church. But right now, I don't see a lot of that happening. I see it mostly about media attention on this figure, this one man, and his battle against, you know, Roman Curia, corruption, or other things, the bureaucracy. And I think he would like to make it less about just him, but somehow there needs to be time for that to filter through appointments, through people kind of picking up his message and running with it. So I think that's the key to his success. Yes?
So, can you describe perhaps a little bit what the period of Sede Vacante is kind of like, especially in the wake of Benedict XVI? And I don't know how connected you were with the Vatican at that point, but related to that, what was kind of the logic, do you think, in the election of Francis as Pope by the Cardinals?
Well, yeah, I was there, because once I was in Rome and I had my book coming out, suddenly I became an expert. You write a book, you're an expert. And I did commentary for ABC News. I think the logic, what happens in between when a pope dies or now resigns, is that there's a period of time when the cardinals come to Rome. Obviously, if the pope is dead, they have a funeral. But in this case, they just came to Rome and talked. And they come together in meetings for a week, or longer if needed. And this involves the cardinals who are under the age of 80 and who vote in the conclave, and those over the age of 80. So there's a wider participation. And at that time, in 2013, there was a lot of discussion about, you know, all these petty scandals going on in the Vatican, the leaked documents. It looked like, you know, there was a great sympathy for Pope Benedict, but I think a lot of them felt he had been ill-served by other officials working at the Vatican, and they wanted to make sure that didn't continue. They wanted somebody who could come in and clean house. So, when Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio of Argentina stood up, gave a very short speech, laying out his vision of the faith, how the faith works, not by rules and announcing doctrine as much, and not even being immersed in its own theology, as he put it, but by showing the world who we are, by how we act in the world, by who we help, by showing love, charity, and salvation, and the way to salvation. And he said, somebody needs to come in and clean house here at the Vatican. Well, this immediately struck a chord. And even though these meetings are secret, it didn't take too long. There were 5,000 journalists in Rome. I guess, I never counted. That's what they said. Most of them ended up talking to each other. Now, it was like an echo chamber in the press hall, and I actually got tired of being interviewed because I didn't have anything new to say. So I went out and I talked to some cardinals. And I went to some of the older cardinals, the ones who would not be voting in the conclave, figuring they're probably going to feel freer to talk about what's going on. And the day before the conclave began, I had 3 or 4 cardinals who had mentioned Bergoglio's name to me. On their own, without prompting. And I thought that's too coincidental. So I had avoided picking a candidate, but I blogged the day before. I said, Cardinal Bergoglio is the man to watch. And boy, am I glad I did. I'm just seen as the guy who called the papal election. And as a matter of fact, there was a Monsignor who from time to time would call me. He worked in Rome, but he was outside of Rome. He was in Ireland at the time. He would call and say, "What are you hearing?" And I told him, I said, "Well, strangely, I'm hearing Bergoglio." And he said, "Yeah, he's too old, 76. I said, "Yeah, I know, probably right." But and he hung up. And later I found out he had gone to his friends and said, "I'm hearing Bergoglio." His friends went to the betting place, Paddy Power, and bet a considerable sum, and Bergoglio was 45-1. So they did very well. They later came to Rome and bought me dinner. But anyway, to get back to your question, I think the cardinals really wanted somebody, number one, who could clean house at the Vatican, and number two, who had a kind of a fresh outlook on the faith. I do not think they realized how big a change in perspective this Pope would bring to the whole process of evangelizing. So there probably is a little bit of buyer's remorse there. I'm not sure that he would be elected today if they knew all that was to come. It's an open question. Yes?
So, as a journalist, you have had a chance to see, you have a wealth and depth of understanding of what's going on when the Pope speaks. And then you turn around and you see it being reported like in a normal, non-religious news service, and they're projecting. It would seem to me, particularly the first year, every time Francis spoke, there was tempest in the teapot. Some for legitimate reasons, some just simply because the mainstream press seemed to be projecting. How did you relate, personally? I mean, did you ever, get frustrated when you would look to see a colleague, or maybe not a well-known colleague, but somebody writing something, and you just go, this person just doesn't even know what they're talking about. They should just shut
many times. Not only with Francis, but with John Paul II and Benedict as well. There's been a tendency, because Pope Francis is such a big newsmaker, there's more coverage of him. I mean, media outlets have sent more people to cover him, and especially on his foreign trips. There are reporters some of whom have never covered the Vatican before, some have never covered religion before, so they're out of their depth. It's a little frustrating sometimes to see what is kind of heralded as brand new when you know it isn't brand new. When you know that, Pope Benedict said that. For example, even some of Francis's comments about the excesses of capitalism. If you go back to Benedict's statements or John Paul II's statements, you will find write the same notes being hit by them. Now Francis does it in perhaps more colorful language. He's a soundbite machine, he really is. But yeah, there's a lot of media overreaction going on to almost every word he says, in part because, you know, much of what Pope Francis is saying is unrehearsed. It's not well thought out. Benedict, even when he was ad-libbing, it sounded like he was taking dictation from God. Francis, you can tell that as soon as the words are out of his mouth, there's sometimes a look on his face like, I might want to have that back. So, you know, like spanking children, or Catholics shouldn't reproduce like rabbits, or probably not the best turns of phrase. But in a way, that makes him more interesting to the media too. He's a human being. He's letting it show. So I think we're stuck with you know, the fact that some of the finer points are going to be lost on some journalists. Hopefully they'll get better at it. Any other questions? Well, anyway, I thank you. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.